Good evening. My name is Steve Smith. I'm the Director of Planning and Regional Programs at the San Bernardino County Transportation Authority. Welcome to the Long Range Multimodal Transportation Plan Outreach, public meeting number 2 for the project we know as the LRMTP. We're so glad that you joined us this evening. We might wait just a few more seconds for anyone else to join us, but we'll be starting just momentarily. All right, everyone, thank you. And again, my name's Steve Smith with SBCTA. We're going to have Nancy Verduzco of Ariano introduce the meeting and orient ourselves to what's going to be discussed this evening. But just welcome. I hope you have a lot of questions ready for us. We're ready to explain what's going on and get some input. Thank you very much for joining us, Nancy.
Thank you, Steve. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We do have Spanish interpretation available for this meeting, and we do encourage you to use it if you need it. We also ask that you please select a language, either English or Spanish. You can do so by clicking on the Zoom interpretation icon that is located at the bottom of your screen. Doing so will ensure that you can hear the consecutive interpretation from Spanish to English if we do happen to have any Spanish-speaking comments. So to hear the Spanish interpretation only, you have the option to click mute original audio. Again, this is optional, not a requirement. Hola, bienvenidos. Gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Si necesitan interpretación en español, por favor hagan clic en el icono de interpretación y seleccionen español. Para escuchar solo el idioma interpretado, haga clic en mute original audio para silenciar el audio inglés. Thank you all. And now before we get started, I just want to give a couple of reminders regarding the meeting format. This meeting is being recorded. Webcams and microphones will remain off during the presentation with the exception of our presenters. And we will be having a Q&A session at the very end of the presentation. During this time, you may ask a question or a comment by clicking the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom controls or by dialing *9 if you're calling in with your phone. But during the presentation, if you do have any questions or comments, feel free to drop them in the Q&A at any point, and we will address them during the Q&A session. Now I will turn it over to Marie to go over the agenda.
Thanks, Nancy, and thanks everyone for joining us tonight. So today we're going to be covering a little background about the long-range multimodal transportation plan itself. We'll be discussing some of the community engagement we've been doing, going over the plan vision and goals, talk about some of the scenarios that we've been planning for over the course of this project. And finally, we'll be talking about some of the key plan themes and the strategic priorities. That's one of the main topics for tonight, and we really hope to get some good feedback on those. Then we'll talk about what's coming next, and we will be happy to take your questions. All right, so a little bit of background here. We first started this project about a year and a half ago, I want to say. And if you could advance it one more slide. And to the next. Yes, so the purpose of the long-range multimodal transportation plan is to ensure the safe and efficient management, operation, and development of a regional multimodal transportation system. That when linked with appropriate land use planning will efficiently serve the mobility needs of San Bernardino County residents, businesses, and visitors with robust connectivity to the regional system. So that's the overall kind of guiding purpose of this study. But a county plan for San Bernardino County is situated within the context of the larger regional and statewide plans, including California Transportation Plan 2050, California Climate Action Plan, and SCAG regional transportation plans as well. So it's kind of within this larger context that we're working. San Bernardino County has, SBCTA has been doing a lot of planning efforts over the past several years, and so this project helps to pull all those together. It helps to identify projects and position for funding. Those are some of the key purposes of why we're doing this plan. So the process basically includes 6 key steps. At the beginning of the process, we analyzed existing conditions throughout the county. We looked at some of the key problems and opportunities that exist along the transportation system. We developed some scenarios to look at potential futures and how the system reacts to changes. And at the moment, we are currently in the process of developing plan recommendations and the draft and final plan itself. So that's why we're definitely seeking input on this stage, but we've had community engagement opportunities throughout the process. And the LRMTP in the San Bernardino County is made up of kind of 6 subregions that are consistent with SBCTA's funding measure I and how funding is allocated, because there's quite a few big difference throughout the county, differences in terms of geography and development. So those subregions include the San Bernardino Valley, the mountains, the Morongo Basin, the Colorado River, the North Desert, which includes Barstow, and the Victor Valley area. So that's kind of how the recommendations are going to be organized according to these 6 subregions. So that brings us to our first poll of the evening, get everyone started. So would you please answer which subregion you live in, work in, or most frequently visit? Get a sense of where people are from. Hopefully this is pretty straightforward question. Or if you live or work outside of San Bernardino County, there's an option there as well. Let's see, give everyone a chance to answer here. All right, looks like mainly stopped here. So let's go ahead and end this poll. All right, so it looks like the majority of folks here are from the San Bernardino Valley, which is the most populous sub area. Great, we got someone from the Colorado River area. Fantastic, glad you joined us here today, and someone from outside San Bernardino County as well. So thank you for that. All right, so a little bit of background on our community engagement efforts. So throughout this process, we've had a project website, go sbcta.com/LRMTP. We also have a story map there that includes a lot of background on the county, the development, its transportation system, and some of the key issues in terms of, where this plan might go in the future. So feel free to check that out because there's a lot of great data there. We had a survey that was available about August through October of last year, so last fall, and we got some good data out of that, and we're going to be sharing some of the results with you coming up here in a second. But we have another online survey that's available now. We'll drop the link in the chat, and I'll also cover it a little bit more further along in the presentation. But this next online survey is intended to gather some input on some of the specific projects that SBCTA has coming up in the next 10 or so years to gauge opinions on how those projects would affect folks and what you think about those forthcoming projects in each sub area. So we'd really appreciate you taking that survey, passing it along to your friends. Let us know your thoughts on those projects. So far, we've also had two initial virtual open houses, similar to this one, back in September of 2023, several pop-up meetings throughout the county, and we've had ongoing engagement with stakeholder working group, including members of transit agencies and local municipalities and other key stakeholders, and that's been very helpful in moving this process forward and getting us some good input from a broad section of interests and opinions around the county. All right, so a little bit more about the online survey that we held last fall. About over 600 folks responded to that survey. Most lived in the valley. You can see how the responses kind of shook out geographically, which is similar to the distribution of population across the county in general. So we can look at some of the results on the next slide. We asked folks what their mode choices were, what kinds of transportation they typically use. 66% of our respondents, so 2/3, they spend a majority of their trips in the car, driving alone. That was their predominant mode choice, which is pretty typical for the county. Most trips are taken by car. But we do had some folks who use the bus, the train, walking, biking, or folks who don't have a commute. Okay, so on the next slide, we also asked folks what their mobility challenges were. Makes it harder for them to get around. And by and large, the dominant response was, my trip takes too long because of traffic congestion or other delays. So delay was by far the biggest concern for folks. There were a lot of sort of similar responses about affordability, long travel distances, or just, not enough connectivity. Less of a concern about safety, but definitely delay. And notably, delay was an issue not only for car drivers, but also for transit riders as well. So across the board, delay was the biggest concern. And we asked folks also to relate rate their priorities. What was it most important for the county transportation system to do? What's it most important for this plan? And the number one response was make it more convenient for people to get around without driving. So improving the transit network, improving the active transportation network, so that auto doesn't have to be the default choice for most people to get around. Second most popular was providing better transportation options for low-income populations, students, the elderly, and people with disabilities. Then help to improve the health and safety of our communities. Fourth was supporting the economy by getting people to their jobs and moving goods from suppliers to customers. And finally, protecting the environment and reducing the effects of climate change was the least important of the 5 to our respondents. All right, so that gave us some good input on, where folks were thinking about their priorities and their challenges. So we took a lot of the input we gathered during our public meetings, our surveys from our stakeholders, and our analysis. And we kind of coalesced it into a vision statement and a series of goals and objectives for the plan. So the LRMTP's vision statement is SBCTA's long-range plan supports integrated multimodal transportation to strengthen the health of our communities, the environment, and our economy by providing safe, reliable, and equitable connectivity for people and goods into and through San Bernardino County. So hopefully that's our elevator pitch for this plan. And then we had with it a series of goals and objectives. I'm not going to go over all of this, but just want to draw your attention to these 6 goal categories, including improving multimodal mobility and connectivity. On the equity side, reducing transportation burdens for low-income communities, communities of color, people with disabilities, and other disadvantaged groups. On the economy side, supporting a vibrant, resilient economy, enhancing environmental health and reducing negative transportation impacts, enhancing quality of life and public health, enabling vibrant, healthy communities, and finally, prioritizing safety by providing a safe and secure transportation system. So those goals outline our approach, and that's what we're trying to achieve through this plan. So scenario planning, let me cover a little bit about our process here. So one thing that I could say for sure throughout this process is that things are changing pretty rapidly in the transportation world. There's a lot of unknowns in the future in terms of climate change, for example, or how much things cost, or the technology that people use to get around with electric mobility coming more online, and how people travel. Are they working from home? Are they commuting? So there's been a lot of big changes over the past 5 to 10 years that have really changed how we see transportation and how people get around. and how we plan for the future. So scenario planning is a process of looking at potential different futures and seeing how they affect the transportation system. So that's what we did. We modeled a few different potential futures, both in terms of system demand, in terms of how people use the system, and how they travel, and also the supply and the transportation network itself. So I'll go into a little more about how we developed those scenarios. So first, on the demand side, for these scenarios, we basically left the transportation system as is, assuming that projects currently planned in the pipeline would be implemented, but other than that, no changes would be made. But we changed the way people use that system. So the first scenario we're calling business as usual, because it basically assumes a return to pre-pandemic conditions. So basically about 2019 travel behavior, a lot less working from home, more of those pre-pandemic patterns in place. So we also considered kind of a bookend to business as usual, which we're calling virtual future, which was that the shift to remote work is permanent and it even grows stronger. So more people in the future, what happens if more people work from home? There's less commuting on the network. So we wanted to see what the effects would be there. We also wanted to explore the effects of land use on the transportation network. So we created a smart growth scenario, which assumes that all the growth that was projected, particularly in the Valley subregion, because that's where a majority of the population and employment growth is projected, instead of just kind of having that distributed throughout, we concentrated it along, for example, key transit corridors to understand the effects. This is all sort of different potential things you can look at with a travel demand model. So also we created some scenarios on the transportation supply side. For one, we wanted to look at what happens if we invest in network improvements across the board, assuming that additional funding is available for transportation improvements. So this scenario includes roadway improvements, transit network improvements, new transit corridors, additional roadway capacity. So this basically is kind of an enhanced transportation system. We also wanted to look at what happens if we really beef up transit on its own. This is something that we heard frequently from stakeholders is, what happens if we really invest in transit frequency? So we assumed a scenario where we doubled bus frequency throughout the greater region. And we also assumed that the growth, like in the smart growth scenario, that the population and employment growth was going to be concentrated around transit corridors. Finally, we did a sensitivity test on potential roadway pricing. With the decline in the purchasing power of the gas tax and alternative funding methods being discussed at different levels, we wanted to understand how a potential increase in the cost of driving would affect demand on the system. So we included that as a potential test. So just how did these actually shake out? What happened when we ran these scenarios? And again, these aren't alternatives like different futures that we're considering implementing, but we want to understand how different potential futures affect the network so we can make responsible choices going forward. So we compared all the different scenarios to the business as usual case. When we looked at the virtual future with more working from home, for example, we saw a big decrease in delay across the network because we don't have those strong peaks on the system, but we saw a considerable decrease in transit ridership because a lot of folks ride transit to and from work. So there was definitely a substantial decrease there. For the smart growth scenario itself, we really didn't see a significant change in terms of how people use the system, except there was a decent bump in transit ridership of 20% when we reallocated growth along major transit corridors. In the enhanced network, where we beefed up the overall transportation network, we saw a significant decrease in delay, but not much change in, for example, the total amount of miles that people drive. And finally, with the transit expansion scenario where we beefed up transit frequency and reallocated growth, we did see a fairly significant change in decrease in how much people drove and a really significant increase in how much people use transit. So we kind of showed that both reallocating some of the projected growth and increasing transit was necessary in order to effect meaningful change. So yeah, just a few kind of findings on this one on the next slide. We found that it's pretty difficult to reduce the amount people drive on the system overall. If the capacity is there, people will tend to use it. But delay is easier to reduce than the total amount of miles people drive. Our roadway pricing sensitivity test showed kind of a correlation between how much the increase in auto operating costs would affect how people drive. For example, we found that the cost would be probably pretty high in order to show significant change. For example, raising gas prices by over $5 a gallon would that kind of increase would reduce vehicle miles traveled by 10%, but that's a significant cost for drivers on the system. So it just kind of helps to understand what those correlations are. And as I mentioned, the transit expansion, along with the smart growth scenario, does show the outcome of increasing ridership and reducing auto trips. But in order to actually implement significant transit expansion would require a lot more operating dollars than is currently available to the transit operators in the system. All right, so let's get into kind of the meat of the meeting, and then we'll have a couple more polls and some Q&A. So just a little more of listening to me talk, and then we'll get some more input. We took all this information and the scenarios and what we've been working on over the past year or so, and we wanted to distill it down into what are some key themes? What are the main challenges facing the county transportation system? And then once we identify those main challenges, we can talk about how to address them. So our first challenge is multimodal connectivity is challenging in a county that has such dispersed development, long travel distances. And this very nature of how the county is laid out tends to lead to congestion and auto dependency. So that's a challenge. Freight movement. Freight is a backbone of the local economy. There's a lot of distribution centers. There's a lot of truck traffic. It creates a lot of jobs, but it also contributes to air quality problems, congestion, problems with the roadway, the pavement itself, and safety concerns. Climate change, for example, heat, wildfire, floods, we saw this recently, can disrupt the transportation network, and long distances that people have to travel in the heat cause some problems for current zero emissions technology. Equity-focused communities, the county has many areas that are considered low income or disadvantaged by state or federal criteria. Those areas have disproportionate environmental burdens, affordability challenges, and trouble getting around without a car. Finally, funding is a big challenge. It's really important. We need funding to improve our transportation network, but the amount of funding needed is greater than the available funding sources, particularly when it comes to transit operations. That's a big challenge. So we put together a series of priorities. How are we going to address these challenges and get closer to achieving our goals? So this is what we wanted to go over with you and get some feedback. Are we on the right track? And how are these priorities, we'd really appreciate hearing from you in terms of how are these priorities, how could they work in your communities? So in order to improve multimodal connectivity, some of our key strategies are one of our key strategies is to invest in a strong interconnected transit network and develop a core network in the areas of the county that can support it with the amount of development there is to develop an interconnected network of enhanced frequent transit services. Not just a series of routes, but an interconnected network that we can use to plan around, that local jurisdictions can use to incorporate into their local land use plans and begin to focus development around those key corridors. So it's not just spotty and every jurisdiction is doing a different thing, but if we have this kind of county-wide network that we understand is the basis of fast, frequent, reliable service, then we can start to help to organize our development around those corridors. And in order to make that a success, of course, we need to get people to and from that system. We need to create those first and last mile connections. So one of our priorities here is to define an active transportation priority list and advance project development to position for funding. There's a lot of active transportation improvements planned, but really prioritizing and funding those is something that's going to be important to making that network work. Other strategies for multimodal connectivity, improving the quality and efficiency of county roadways, prioritizing state of good repair, very important. We've heard a lot about this throughout the county on most of our meetings is prioritizing the quality of local roadways. Also making local roadways work better and work more efficiently through use of technology. So coordinating different signals and other kind of aspects of traffic flow, and coordinating it with the bus system as well to make those corridors move more smoothly. Also completing the San Bernardino County portion of the regional multimodal managed lane system as a priority. There's lots more segments that are planned in the regional plans, so bringing those online to help with congestion and traffic flow. Finally, also continuing to manage demand on the network where we can, using travel demand management techniques, continuing carpool and van pool initiatives to try to reduce the demand on the system where we can. All right, moving on to freight movement. What are our priorities here? First of all, designating and improving key freight corridors. Of course, we have the highway system that moves a lot of freight, but how trucks get from the highway system to key suppliers, distribution centers, what routes they use. We want to develop a designated plan for arterial freight corridors so we can start to improve those corridors. And provide reasons for providers to use those designated routes that are built to handle that kind of traffic, and having elements like truck parking so we don't have a lot of conflicts between trucks and residential areas. We can better separate those kinds of uses. Continuing to work with the private sector on key initiatives such as transition to clean trucks, providing the infrastructure to support truck charging, for example, and working on identifying strategic opportunities to shift freight from truck to rail where possible. And next, on the climate change side, some of our priorities are investing in corridors, particularly corridors with few alternatives. There's quite a few areas in the county, including the North Desert, the Morongo Basin, the mountains, where there's just one or two kind of key corridors that everything depends on. And so if those corridors shut down, it's a big problem for travel. So encouraging resiliency, particularly across those corridors. And also with Brightline West, the new rail line coming across from Las Vegas through kind of along the I-15 corridor through the Victor Valley and into Rancho Cucamonga. There's a important opportunity there to develop that corridor as an alternative to I-15 through the Capone Pass. So creating those connections to make it a really solid alternative. Also supporting zero emissions transition is a huge goal here. Again, working on the transition to clean trucks. Supporting our transit agency partners with their transition to zero emission transit vehicles, and supporting development of hydrogen production hubs within the Inland Empire to help with hydrogen fueling of particularly like the bus network. And on the next slide, we have our priorities for equity. A lot of this includes taking advantage of available funding opportunities. A lot of the current funding programs include prioritization measures for improvements in equity-focused communities, so really taking advantage of that and incorporating those equity principles into the application for funding programs. Also, SBCTA has seen a lot of success with, for example, fare reduction programs, continuing and expanding advertising those programs for students, seniors, low-income transit riders. That's really helped to kind of boost ridership and raise awareness. And also expanding engagement, partnering with local jurisdictions, partnering with community-based organizations to expand engagement into those communities and really understand the needs and communicate the programs that are available and the different services that are available. All right, finally, what are our strategic priorities for funding? Expanding sources of funding for transit operations. So in order to create this robust transit network, we'd like to see in San Bernardino County, it's going to take additional operating funds. So working with our state and regional partners to look at different ways to fund operational improvements, continuing to use excess toll revenue for transit projects and ongoing operations. We really need ongoing sources of funding for transit operations and not just one-time funding. And overall, importance of increasing flexibility in funding, increasing the flexibility and effectiveness of the funding programs we have. Aligning future funding measures with the priorities of this LRMTP. Developing what's called a VMT mitigation bank that allows projects that need to provide funds to mitigate VMT increases, allowing them greater flexibility to provide improvements where they're needed most throughout the network. And also partnering with, continuing to partner with community-based organizations. That's really helpful in order to develop support for grant applications. All right, so those are some of our strategic priorities in the plan. So what we want to know is, this is a good chance to weigh in on a couple big picture priorities. So right now, we would love to hear from you in terms of what are the most important topics you want to see covered in the LRMTP. So these include active transportation improvements, climate change improvements, freight network improvements, congestion, state of good repair, and transit improvements. And please select up to your top 3 concerns. What is most important for the LRMTP to address? We'll wait a few moments for folks to think about it. Okay, give it 30 more seconds or so. All right, I think we can close it out there. So it looks like we've got a couple of key winners here in terms of active transportation improvements and transit improvements. Those are the top ones, also climate change. And kind of a, support across the board for some of these as well, some for freight and congestion and state of good repair. Well, the good news is all of these are going to be covered in the LRMTP. We just really want to understand, kind of where the priorities are for our community members. right. All right, let's move on to our next question. All right, so what should be SBCTA's most important priorities for funding over the next 20 years? You can select up to 3 priorities. What should get top billing in terms of how SBCTA allocates funding? So please feel free to weigh in with your up to 3 priorities. So we've got similar topics here somewhat: active transportation improvements, freight improvements, state of good repair, congestion relief, transit improvements, and zero emissions car or truck transition, for example, charging infrastructure. Okay, just a few more seconds. All right, let's end it. Okay. So it looks like transit improvements is the top importance, followed by active transportation improvements, and then zero emissions transition and state of good repair. Well, thank you for weighing in on those. That's helpful for us to understand those priorities. All right, well, I'll just cover a few next steps and then we'll go into the Q&A. So as I mentioned before, we do have another survey available now at the link below. And this is an opportunity to provide feedback on some of the projects considered for your sub area. These recommendations or the questions are broken into sub area, so you can focus on the ones that affect your community, including things like potential rapid bus routes, active transportation improvements, highway improvements, things like that. So we'd really appreciate you taking that survey and letting us know your thoughts on those projects. And we do have a $100 gift card drawing at the end of that survey. All right, so we are going to continue collecting input throughout this stage. You have our contact information there if you have additional comments or questions. We do have the project website and also the email address, lrmtp@gosbcta.com. Feel free to email us your thoughts and recommendations. So we're going to be taking these priorities and using them to develop an action plan and recommendations at the sub area level, and compiling those into our draft plan for public and stakeholder review. So that's what we'll be focusing on over the next few months. So we hope you'll stay engaged. Thank you. And we can move on to any questions. I'll pull up the Q&A now. Let's see. Nancy, did any come through? I'm not seeing any questions right now. Oh, here we go. Are there any news with the Metrolink projects regarding both SCORE and the Lilac to Rancho double track project? All right, well, is there any of our team members with specific Metrolink experience can help with that question?
Yeah, this is Steve. Hi, everybody. Thanks again for being here. And Nancy, you may have more exact information on it, and I'll defer to you if you would like to answer the question.
Yeah, I'm sure you got it, Steve.
All right. So anyway, that project is in the pipeline. There is a schedule actually that's in our quarterly report or report on the website, I believe, where that stands. But it's been through environmental. The segment would be Lilac to Sycamore, and it would include a pedestrian underpass and so forth. And I think, Nancy, we were entering into design at this point. But I think that's where you probably ought to jump in from the transit department.
I don't have any further information on that. I just know that we also have started to allocate funding to this portion of the project.
Right. And it is fully funded moving forward. I believe Metrolink will be the implementer on that.
All right, it looks like we've got a hand up from Brianna Egan.
Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you for this presentation. I think it was informative to hear some of the results of prior surveys and stakeholder engagement. I think I want to express the goals shared here are, I think, a good step in the right direction for the future of transportation planning in the county. There are a number of considerations that I wanted to share when it comes to things like increasing transit ridership and what I feel like would boost those things. And some of these items are included in the survey, but some of them are not. And so in particular, I think the Metrolink improvements would be really transformative for prioritizing those double tracking projects, the SCORE projects in particular, getting those fully funded and built. But also I wanted to provide support and really encourage SBCTA to explore electrification of the San Bernardino line, which is theoretically and technically possible, but we need the political will and kind of the agency support to make this happen. Because of all the benefits that electrification would bring for service improvements and many other things, including connecting with Brightline West. So I really wanted to highlight that because I felt like that in general, Metrolink projects were missing from the survey. And then just to kind of add and round out my comments, I think to really increase mode shift in the county, it would be best to focus on connecting our bus systems with Metrolink stations for direct access to rail stations, and also connecting the bike networks that we have across different cities, making more protected bike lanes, connecting those together to shift from cars to bikes, for example. And then also investing in bus rapid transit and technology like trolley buses, which will be electric, zero emissions forms of transportation. So I wanted to share those ideas, and thank you for your outreach on this.
Thanks, Brianna. That was great comments, very helpful. Yeah, we actually had, during our meeting on Tuesday, we had other questions similarly on, for example, electrification of the Metrolink line. Joel, who's working on our project, is working on some zero emissions studies with Metrolink, including, some of their, they're looking at different technologies to potentially, introduce zero emission service along Metrolink lines. Is there anything else you wanted to say about that, Joel?
I would clarify, our study that I'm working on is not strictly a zero emission study. It's a multiple unit implementation plan. It's somewhat technology agnostic, but it's assuming it's based on the hydrogen vehicle that the SBCTA has acquired. In a general sense, Metrolink is looking at ways to transition to zero emissions, but there's no commitment to a specific technology yet.
Right. Right.
Yeah, if I could just follow up, great comments, Brianna. Thank you for those. And just to add a few notes, there is a joint effort with Metro right now to how we can operationalize increase in frequency on Metrolink, especially using some of the shorter, smaller trains like we have implemented with Arrow. And And I believe there is a game plan for how to get there. Of course, everything involves funding, but that is really part of the SCORA concept to significantly increase the frequency on Metrolink. On the bike around Metrolink stations, we actually have had 2 phases of implementation on that, thanks to the state active transportation program grants. And so we had a first phase that was completed a couple of years ago, and we're actually in construction now on the second phase. And so we've prioritized bike ped around transit, and then BRT, as you may know. We have the East Street BRT that's been operational for 10 years, and West Valley Connector is under construction as we speak. That'll be from Pomona, connecting to Montclair, Ontario, the airport, up through Rancho. And so actually, we're very excited about all those projects. Has been, challenge getting funding together for some of them, but Metrolink definitely on our radar as part of the SCORE program.
Great. Well, it looks like we've got another hand up from Marvin Norman.
Yes, thank you for having this again, Marvin here. I'm sure many of you guys are seeing me enough times in showing up in meetings, but so why not show up here, right? But like to echo many of Brianna's comments, and in particular, I'd also like to make a point too, in so much as this plan is also trying to be done in terms of putting together a new ballot funding measure. We have to, one thing I'd have to, to point out and really try to bring a fine point under is that, sometimes people will say, hey, what's the, like, I think a fine point needs to be made under the fact that at the present, the bike and ped situation, and even the transit situation, in many cases is just subpar in comparison to the driving situation. So when we're talking about making the investments into infrastructure, we really need to play catch up on the other modes. It's great to, I know a lot of, both within SBCTA and more broadly across the state, there's a lot of goals and ideas and just the concept of, we're being, quote unquote, multimodal. And so, we're going to do all modes, but I think, we're going to be interested. Not right now, but what we really need to do, it's pretty obvious at this point that we can't just be agnostically multimodal. We need to have the other modes need a far greater investment and a greater help at the moment to get on par just for driving. And that's not to say that we expect that people will be able to drive from Blythe to, or from Needles to Barstow and bike or take transit in the same ease from Needles to Barstow. But for example, I live half a mile from my closest grocery store. I can't get to my grocery store without having to ride my bike on a 40-mile-per-hour assigned street where people are driving 50. So I can't get to the closest park without going on the street with the same type of situation. So we're in desperate need of investments into other options, and that those investments will often have to be greater than the investments that are being made for cars in the same time frame, because we've invested in cars for so long that the other modes have to play catch up now. And so and also I know also that with that there's a desire for a lot of the Metrolink thing to be quote unquote mode or agnostic on technology, but I think it's going to become evident at some point that hydrogen is not a viable, is not an optimal course of action for trains, especially if we're talking about SCORE type operations. And so we, for example, we see from Caltrain that this coming up this weekend when they're going to start the electric service, their route from San Jose to San Francisco is about the same length as the San Bernardino line. And they're going to cut their route trip, and they're going to cut 25 minutes off that trip even though their line has twice as many stations as the San Bernardino line. And so I don't know if we would get that with hydrogen, but that's what the type of performance we're getting with they're getting with the electric train. So, you know, it's great to get more trips, but you know, those trips need to be faster too. And so we need to I know the state and it's very invested in hydrogen at the moment, but you know, it's a waste. It's you know, it's a rabbit hole that we're going down, and that I think a lot of other places around the world are already starting to realize it's not worth it, and just are just on its wire. So, anything that's quote unquote mode or technology agnostic really should not be agnostic to include catenary, at least include it, if not. And I think that'll stop for now.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Norman. Always appreciate you being here. Really do. And, you know, I think that's something we should remember to address in the report when we get there. Not that we'll be able to promise a result, because it's a multi-agency regional question how Metrolink works, and the funding, of course, is challenging no matter where you go. But great comments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So we have another question in the Q&A. Will we be able to use funding from the I-10 express lanes toward other methods of transit to help alleviate traffic? Great question. I know Steve has a little more specifics on this, but I believe that, you know, short answer, yes, there is the opportunity to use the funds toward transit. You know, there's sort of a hierarchy, I guess, of where those funds go, but transit being one of them. And, you know, as additional express lanes come online, that's one of the things that we're recommending specifically in the LRMTP, is to, you know, considering that is a ongoing source of funding, that it's really crucial to use express lane funding to help transit.
Yeah, well put. Thank you.
All right. Other questions? All right, got another one. Let's see. Can you tell us the percentage breakdown of how express lanes revenue will be used? Transit improvements on parallel routes should account for a major share. So I know that there's that information in terms of how that's divvied up. Steve, do you have any more info on that?
Yeah, another great question. So the way the toll revenue works for the first segment, which was just opened a few weeks ago, that's from LA County line to I-15, basically. We do have some bonds to pay off, and there are operating costs and so forth. So that always has to be paid up front. And there is a priority, as Marie referred to, that the board has set. And there are several different ways that we would call it the excess revenue, that is above and beyond all of the other obligations, bonds, maintenance, operations, and so on. But I believe for that segment, transit investment is the next in line in terms of priority. Those are always board decisions, though, you know, year by year, and how that gets budgeted, but it is an additional source. We have also added to the next segment, which would be east of I-15, the possibility of investing in zero emission trucks. And we know that's super important to try to accelerate that transition. So that is something the board has endorsed along with transit. So two very important priorities. Can't really come up with a percentage at this point because of some of our other obligations, but we will start to get there once we get farther into the toll revenue collection, and the board is weighed in on how to spend the excess revenue. That'll be a few years down the road.
All right. I see James Albert has a hand up.
Yes, thank you. I was on the call on Tuesday. Just want to add from at this meeting, one of the things that I've been riding my bike to work for the last, I would say, couple of years, and I've noticed that in terms of the incentives, I've noticed that the incentives haven't necessarily kept rise with the cost of living. I think in terms of what I've been seeing is we've only been getting like $25 gift cards only from Amazon every 6 months. And obviously with the rising cost of living, you know, that's not keeping up with that rising cost. So definitely would like to see those incentives increased. And then also notice that as a county employee, there's no reduction in fare for using Metrolink. I know that it definitely discounts for if you want to use the bus for a monthly plan, but for Metrolink you only have the pre-tax benefits. So definitely want to see Metrolink play a role in the commuter ridership for big employers, and especially now that employers, at least at the county level, are essentially encouraging employees to do surveys for their commutes. I think it'd be interesting to see how we can better incentivize employers to help reduce vehicle miles traveled for their employees, and encouraging them to live closer to where they work in such a big county like ours.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Absolutely.
Nancy, did you want to mention, I think we increased our van pool incentive recently.
I don't have all the details for the van pool, but I do want to just point out or mention to, I'm sorry, I saw your name for 2 seconds and then it disappeared from me.
James.
James. Metrolink has a corporate partner program that that the county should be invested in, that would see a reduction and or have them cover the cost for you. So just on a staff level, we'll reach out to them to see what the benefits that they're offered there. But yes, I know Vanpool has increased the coverage. I do not know all the numbers for that, but you can go to our SBCTA.com commuter service and commuter services and drop down to Vanpool, and it'll have all the information you need about for what lowering the cost for your Vanpool. We've increased our incentive so that we know that you're not able to fill a Vanpool hardly anymore, and as well as based on your income. So also you can reach out to me personally or Nicole Soto, who's the staff member currently who's taking care of Vanpool, and we can address that. But just for general information, that's where I would direct you first. And I think that's all the information that I have. But I know that just internally, just as an FYI for SBCTA, we're always looking for ways to provide lower or discounted Metrolink tickets. I'm not sure if you're aware that the ticket that we provide on the current San Bernardino line is a reduced cost. And so we still plan to keep that implemented. And hopefully with any luck, we can increase that our contribution to it so that our writers can see that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to the part of your question that involved, you know, people living closer to where they work, that's an ongoing, you know, that's certainly an issue that affects the transportation system significantly. You know, and there's often a disconnect between how we plan our local land use decisions and how we plan our transportation network. But that's where we're hoping that, you know, by investing in a solid and interconnected transit network between upgraded bus and rail services and active transportation improvements, that as growth does occur, and, you know, the increase in housing that needs to happen over the next several years, we can focus that, along those key corridors and hopefully, help this issue of people having to drive long distances because of housing availability and affordability. So I know we're getting close to time. We're at 7 o'clock. I saw one more question that we have on the Q&A that we can address, and any other questions, please, continue to email us, go to the website, please contact us as well. So this question, what is being done to align this work with CAPTI, California, boy, I'm going to butcher this this acronym, but the California
Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure.
Climate
Sorry,
Action
I got
Plan
that
for
one memorized.
Okay, yes, Climate Action Plan for Transportation Infrastructure. Thank you. Yes, yeah, that's part of our kind of framework for this plan. It's setting it kind of within, the larger California framework, including CAPTI. And I think if you look at the goals from CAPTI and the goals of this LRMTP, they're extremely similar, if not almost overlapping. So the goal, because CAPTI certainly affects, how things are funded at the state level. So having those investments in, for example, the public the transit network, the active transportation improvements, the zero emissions network, that ties in directly with some of the things that CAPTI is trying to achieve. So in terms of sort of congruence, I think that's something that we've been working hard to make sure that those fit together. I saw one more question come in. We'll try to address it really quick. I noticed that the Ontario Connector project is included in the survey under the West Valley projects. Is there any ability to explore alternatives or drop this project altogether? The model of individual vehicles running in a tunnel is inherently low capacity and not what this region deserves. The connection between Ontario and Rancho Cucamonga is projected number of riders would be best served by bus or rail. Any last thoughts on that one from our team at SBCTA?
Well, all of the comments are certainly valued. That project is still under development. Funding is not all there as yet. And so I believe we had some comments at our board meeting to that effect. And so the board has been hearing the comments and will be taking those into consideration as we move forward, along with the funding questions. I think that's probably all we can say at this point, but suffice it to say that a connection between the regional rail system is critically important to our major generators. So Ontario International Airport being one of them. The real question is, how to best do that.
Yes, and
And
please.
can I add one more, just as an FYI, we're working with Omnitrans to have a second shuttle from the Ontario shuttle from Rancho Cucamonga to the airport. So we're looking at next fiscal year, unfortunately for funding constraints, but we are trying to increase the presence of bus transit on that current little route we have there. And I shouldn't say little people, the workers who work at Ontario Airport have increased frequency of their usage there.
Right. Yeah, so please, thank you for taking the survey. And please, comments like that on individual projects, that's exactly the kind of thing we want to hear on that survey. So yes, please do, and pass it along, spread the word to your friends. All right.
Marvin has his hand up.
Oh, Marvin has his hand up. All right, last question.
Yeah, this one's a little bit more project specific. I know a couple months ago I went to something like this hosted jointly by California High Speed Rail Authority and Caltrans about some high desert like staging tracks for BNSF. To get more capacity out of their San Bernardino sub. So what I know, the new Metrolink schedules will max out, or even currently maxes out the allowed revenue moves for Metrolink trains. So is SBCTA working with those two authorities or agencies on that project to get more revenue moves out of the out of the deal since it's in the county. I
Yeah.
don't know if the county's putting money into it, but yeah.
Yeah, we're aware of that, and part of that is a connection to the BIG project, Barstow International Gateway. And so I have understood that it will possibly take some of the trains out and leave a little more room for passenger, but I'm foggy on the exact details. At one point, they were talking about a new intermodal facility right there in Colton, which was not very well received by the community, including SBCTA having some concerns. But the staging tracks are up there in Barstow, and we can get back to you on that specific question. It's a good one.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining tonight. We appreciate it. And we're going to continue to update the website. We will have a summary of the meeting available within the next week or so. And yeah, invite everyone to stay engaged, take the survey, and continue to check the website for project updates.
All right. Again, thanks for joining us. We greatly appreciate your investing the time.